I can't move on from this rather gloomy part of the talk without mentioning cancer. And since 1950, the age-related incidence of the non-tobacco-related cancers has doubled. One of them in particular, non-tobacco-related lung cancer, has doubled, really, as you can see here, very recently indeed, since 2012. Is this because we're getting older as a population? No, that's not. That's a myth. In fact, age expectancy, life expectancy is falling, and the lie to this idea that we're getting more cancer because we're getting older is supported by findings that show that younger people are just as badly affected. Cancer in teens and young adults has doubled, and one of them in particular, bowel cancer in 22 to 37-year-olds, and that's relatively young when it comes to cancer. That's increased 4 times since 1974. And very recently, just in the last year, we've seen signs that this is increasing in the older age groups too. We're really harming ourselves because of the way in which we live, and drugs are absolutely not the answer. 2 more pieces of evidence showing that we're being poisoned, being very badly affected by the lifestyle we have allowed ourselves to be seduced into. Our brains, as I mentioned before, are being damaged in old age and at the start of life. What's happening to you and me, who are still, broadly speaking, in the prime of our lives? Well, we're becoming less intelligent. So this is a meta-analysis carried out, as you can see, by the universities of Hartford, Ulster, and Brussels. One of the leading people in this area is a man called Domini, member of the British House of Lords. He was involved in this study. I respect his work tremendously. And what he's shown is that since 1950, there has been something like a loss of 15 IQ points on average. He published 2 years ago now, 3 years ago now, and since then there's been evidence of a further slight decline. We're continuing down that path. We are mapping the movie Idiocracy, which perhaps some of you may have seen. And I think we should be extremely worried about our children, if of course we have any or many, because fertility is declining too. I think it's very well known that there are increasing problems with female fertility, but that's appearing in men too now. This is another meta-analysis wrapping up a lot of different studies, both intra and international. And what they show is that in every part of the world where we've moved to an industrial diet, the numbers of viable sperm in any sperm sample have declined, as you can see here, by almost 2/3. And this means that we're seeing more men presenting with subclinical infertility and frank infertility. And if you put that together with the problems that we see with infertility in women, we are looking really within the next generation to an uncontrolled and catastrophic population implosion, which we have. There's no one who's paying attention to this, but it's a potentially absolutely disastrous scenario. Here's one possible reason, one contributory factor. This is out of the University of Oslo, a paper that was published 10 years ago now, showing that within the last generation, testosterone levels have fallen very significantly. Males are becoming less masculine. And oddly enough, as populations become heavier, it has the opposite effect on women. Women who are overweight and obese, their levels of testosterone rise, one of the reasons why you have these problems of polycystic ovary syndrome. So women are becoming more masculine, men less so. And this is one of the reasons, just one, that is driving the current vogue for gender dysphoria. I'm not so reductionist as to say that it is all due to these endocrinological shifts, but I think we cannot rule this out as being one, at least, important contributory factor. So maybe you're still young and healthy, or you mistakenly believe yourself to be, but now that I've shown you how prevalent all these chronic degenerative diseases are, let me just make the point that these all have long, latent or preclinical phases growing steadily underground, not causing any symptoms, not diagnosed, before after 2, 3, or 4 decades of progression, they finally come to the surface and are diagnosed. What that means is that almost everybody who doesn't know that they're ill actually is. You just have these diseases in an early preclinical phase. When you look at young, healthy populations, you find that 1 in 5 have non-alcohol related steatohepatitis. They're moving towards severe liver disease. About a quarter have osteopenia. They're moving towards osteoporosis. At least a fifth of non-diabetic adults are moving towards essential hypertension, coronary artery disease, cerebrovascular problems. If you add diabetics in here, you can double that figure. About a fifth have ARCD, age-related cognitive decline. They're moving towards dementia. I think that figure is more like 25% by now. And really alarmingly to me, almost a half of adults in the 40 to 49-year-old group, and really you're close to your physical prime, are showing signs of pre-frailty. That is, you're moving towards sarcopenia and metabesity. But only if you live in modern cities and towns. If you're lucky enough to be living in a blue zone or in a vestigial group, such as the Hadza in Tanzania or the Tsimane in Bolivia, you're not going to age in the way we do. People living in these blue zones, in these vestigial groups, they don't have signs of atheroma in their arteries. Their blood pressure does not increase as they get older. They do not become more insulin resistant. Males do not develop benign prostatic hyperplasia. In males and females alike, the kidneys do not deteriorate. As we get older, we can expect that our kidneys become less able to form concentrated urine. One reason why the elderly are more prone to dehydration. That does not happen in these vestigial cultures. And even more interestingly, and this is something that we've always thought was part and parcel of the aging process, that our brains start to decay. If you go to these vestigial groups, what you see is that as they get older, their brains do not shrink. You do not see the same kind of hippocampal shrinkage, a precursor to dementia, that is so common in our societies today. Now, what this tells us is that what we think of as the aging process, what we see around us, what we think of as the natural phenomenology of aging is not natural. In fact, it is not part of the aging process at all. And we've become convinced, the evidence is really overwhelming now, that all of these aspects of the aging process are in fact signs or symptoms of chronic intoxication caused by the very damaging and destructive way in which we eat and live. And the real global experts have come to the same conclusion. This is the US Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation, and they publish fairly frequently. And in almost every case, whenever they do, they have to conclude that the most important cause of early death, which means premature or preventable death worldwide, is poor diet. I'll return to this later, but we think of these as diseases of civilization. I think when you look around the world today, it's very clear that we're no more civilized than we were, probably less so than we were 100 years ago. But diseases of civilization is a very vague term. It doesn't really help. It has a poetic resonance, but it is not sufficiently detailed to allow us to propose antidotes. So for many, many years now, I and my colleagues have tried to parse all the hundreds of variables that are included in the modern diet and lifestyle, and to determine what are the major pathogenic mechanisms. How does the modern diet and lifestyle make us ill? And we've taken from this massive data, what has emerged are four mechanisms which make us ill. One of them is chronic inflammatory stress, which a lot of people know a lot about because it's been popularized. Type B malnutrition, which I'll talk about later. Dysbiosis, which is the wrong bacteria, mostly, in the gastrointestinal tract and other tissues as well. And glycemic overload or mismatch. And we'll deal with all of those in turn. This may seem complicated. It's a very simplified diagram of chronic inflammation. I won't go into it in detail, but I'm going to look only at the bottom of this picture, the inflammasome. And that is the part where what goes on inside the cell leaves the cell, starts to work in the extracellular spaces and starts to cause tissue damage. So let's look at that. That double line across the top of the screen is your archetypical schematic for a cell membrane, the bilipid cell layer. A phospholipid layer, I should say. Phosphatidyl phospholipids, which include in their molecules various fatty acids, depending on our diet. They contain fatty acids such as omega-6, arachidonic acid over on the left, and omega-3s such as EPA and DHA in the blue box over on the right. And you need both of these in the right sort of proportions because they're involved in switching on and switching off inflammation. Now, some inflammation is absolutely vital if you are invaded by a pathogen or if there's been trauma. inflammation, acute inflammation, is a very, very important part of the way in which the body fights off the pathogen and resolves the trauma. So you need to be able to start an inflammatory reaction, and that's where the omega-6s on the left of the screen come in. They form pro-inflammatory molecules which drive the inflammatory sequence until the threat is gone. And then when the body recognizes that the threat is gone, it starts to break down EPA and DHA into anti-inflammatory or resolving lipid mediators that stops the inflammation. You're now back to where you were before the threat came along. And this will be switched on and off again, depending on what threats you meet during the course of the day and during the course of your life. You can think of the arachidonic acid as an accelerator and the EPA and the DHA as the brake of a car. You need them both to be able to deal with the challenges that life presents. Here's another way of looking at it. This is the inflammasome again. You need to have the omega-6s and the omega-3s. They're the accelerator and the brake. And along comes a challenge, and some of the immune cells in the area will send out various messenger substances, including exosomes, and those exosomes contain a lot of different things, enzymes, microRNAs, and if you need to create an inflammatory reaction, they will also contain significant amounts of enzymes called matrix metalloproteases. And what these do is they cause a lot of tissue destruction. They're very destructive indeed. So in order to have the right amount of inflammation, but not too much, you want to be able to counter the threat, not cause too much tissue damage, you need to have the right ratio of 6s to 3s. And you also, in a natural diet, a pre-transitional diet, the diet we used to eat, it would also have contained compounds called polyphenols. And the polyphenols have two roles. They block the matrix metalloprotease enzymes in a classic inhibitory mechanism. But they also, and now we're moving into epigenetics, they also interact with your DNA in a way that downregulates the genes that codes for the matrix metalloproteases. So when you have enough or plenty of polyphenols in your diet, you'll still have inflammation, but the matrix metalloproteases are not going to be excessive. They won't be causing too much tissue destruction. Everything's going to be present and correct and working in the right order. But here is part of the problem. The modern diet, the post-transitional diet, vastly increases the amount of omega-6s. So the first part of the sequence is running hot. And then if you're eating a lot of ultra-processed foods, which many of us are now, well, the polyphenols have gone. That simply means that the second part of this sequence is running hot as well. You're releasing excessive amounts of matrix metalloprotease enzymes into the tissues. And what they do is they break down the extracellular matrix. And that's this. It's a three-dimensional mesh of microfibers, which runs throughout every cubic micrometer of your body, holding your cells together in the correct configuration so that they can communicate with each other and function collectively. Some of these fibers are collagen. There's many different types of collagen, but there's far more than that. You also have elastin, hyaluronic acid, laminectin, a variety of other long molecules, including amino acid polymers, amino sugar polymers, and you have hybrids. So this is a very specialized and very diverse tissue. It's an organ in its own right, the extracellular matrix. Now, the matrix metalloproteases that are being released in chronic inflammatory stress contain collagenase, and you break down the collagen fibers. They contain elastase, and they break down the elastin. In fact, they break down all of these fibers, all of them. And if those enzymes sound dangerous and destructive, and perhaps
su ovi enzimi oštećeni i ako dolazi do infekcije, na primjer bakterije koja jede meso, kao što vidite, dolazi do raspada tkiva, kože zbog hronične upale koje je inicirano ovim načinom ishrane. U ovom načinu ishrane ima previše omega-6 prema omega-3. Potrebno je da vratimo kočnicu koja nam je oduzeta. A kompanije koje proizvode hranu nas ubijaju u milionima i to je prosto je neverovatno. kako 90% hrane koje proizvode u posljednjem veku i deluje na naš imunni sistem i na naš DNA. Imamo niskog nivoa upale, koje znači unosimo ih, a to izaziva veće upale. Vrlo je važno unositi antiinflamatorne sastojke u ishrani. I unosimo previše šećera, a to mislim da je zaista previše. Previše sodijuma, magnezijuma, potazijuma. Imamo hroničnu upalu, arterije su opterećenje i uopšte unosimo hroničnu upalu u naš organizam. Ako jedemo sve te prazne kalorije, imate nedostatak nutrijenata. Ono što mi osjećamo je tip B, ne ova neuhranjenost na prethodnoj slici. Mali smo sa unosom vitamina.
You're low in 50 or 60 compounds, which are all important, really important for your long-term health, many of which we use to rebuild and regenerate the extracellular matrix. If you have type B malnutrition, you look like this. These American kids living on a diet of hamburgers, shakes and fries, and Pop-Tarts and tater tots, they have inflammatory stress. They have type B malnutrition. They have other problems besides, which is why when you look at them in great detail, you find all of them have in their bodies the seeds of those chronic degenerative diseases, which will, in only a few decades, begin to cause symptoms and which will eventually kill them. Coming right back to where we started, these ultra-processed or industrial foods do not satiate, which is why the more of them you eat, the overweight continues to gain. You just get heavier, and that is serious. It's not good for you at all. It creates this paradox. The people who are the heaviest, who are eating most of these ultra-processed foods, have the worst nutrient status. They get more than enough calories, but they are low in absolutely everything else. And that is a combination that kills. Each 10% increase in consumption of these ultra-processed foods increases the risk of cancer, type 2 diabetes, and death. And it's dose-related. The more you eat, the more you die. And it has exactly the same effect on laboratory animals. This is a preclinical model using rats. If you give them the same foods that we eat, it accelerates the aging process, which is why life expectancy is falling. In the United States, since 2016, in Britain since 2017, and it's going to be happening everywhere else by now because we're eating more ultra-processed foods. So North America is in the lead, the exceptional Americans. They're eating all this ultra-processed industrial junk, which is poisoning them. Britain's next, and then Ireland, Germany, Poland, and Finland as the multinationals roll their leviathan, their juggernaut of ultra-processed foods from north to south and from west to east, even down to the Mediterranean area, where, as a result, the Mediterranean diet is dying out, as indeed are the people who used to consume it, which is a shame because the Mediterranean diet is very, very good for you. It's better than medicine. It does far more than doctors and drugs can do. It reduces the risk of all these conditions by between a half and a third. But we do know a diet that's even healthier, and that's the diet that was consumed in the blue zone of mid-Victorian England, 1850 to 1900, made possible by the agricultural revolution, a huge increase in agricultural productivity, the industrial revolution. Now you had a transport system bringing this increased agricultural productivity into the cities where people worked, and people were working with their hands. It's all blue collar. And when you break it down, what we see is that on average, people were driving and consuming more than 4,000 calories a day. If you look at it in a sex base, women are approximately 2,500 to 3,000 calories a day. Men are between 3,500 and 7,000 calories a day, but they're all slim because they're so physically active, they're burning those calories. And what are they eating? Very little salt, tobacco, or spirits. the only processed foods they're eating are breads and cheese. There's really no ultra-processed industrial foods like the ones we consume. Lots of omega-3s, very little omega-6, lots of polyphenols. It is a super Mediterranean diet. And if diet is important, you should be able to measure the impact of that on public health statistics, and you can. Let's compare mid-Victorian women with their equivalent working class women today, or in the latter stages of the 21st century. The 20th century. Yeah. So you can see here that women have gained 3 years of life expectancy, but that is exclusively due to improved gynecology, obstetrics, and contraception. And if you look at men, we've actually lost 3 years. And we've lost a lot more health expectancy. We know that at that time, the elderly in their 70s, 80s, or 90s were still working in the fields. We know that when they could no longer function as productively as they were required to, they would go to institutions called the workhouses. It was the equivalent to our old folks' homes. And the workhouse meant that they had to work to support themselves, which they did until the last weeks or days before they died. We die very slowly and very expensively. They got to the same age as we do and then died very quickly and inexpensively. It's a med-economic issue amongst other things. When we look at what they died of, it was almost always infection, overwhelming infection. They hardly ever got chronic degenerative disease, only 10% of the levels of the diseases that are so important for us today. This is another research group who's looked at this, and you can see that in 1997 in England and Wales, cancers and cardio and cerebrovascular diseases killed about 66% of the population. In 1880, only 6%. These major causes of ill health and death today did exist in the 19th century, but at levels only 10% of what we see now, and in a population that had a similar life expectancy. And that tells you two things. 90% of the cancer and heart disease and neurodegenerative disease and all of those other conditions are potentially avoidable if you know how to do it. And the 10% of people who did get those diseases in the 19th century, they match the 10% that all the medical specialists say today of the population have strong genetic risk factors. If you're eating really a healthy diet, it is only the minority who have strong genetic risk factors who go on to develop those conditions. Everybody else is protected. So what does that mean for us? If you're eating ultra-processed or industrial foods, you have a very high 6-to-3 ratio, no polyphenols, and therefore you have chronic inflammatory stress in lots of tissues, which could show up in any one of a large number of chronic non-degenerative diseases. And if you're eating these industrial foods, you do not have very much prebiotic fiber in your diet, so the microbiome flips over and becomes predominantly gram-negative, which means you have chronic inflammatory stress inside your guts as well, and that creates a whole raft of additional problems. Very quickly and simply, we put the omega-3s and the polyphenols back into the system, and that switches off a great deal of the inflammation. Then we add xenobiotic, which is a time-release blend of prebiotic fibers, and that will gradually bring your microbiota back to being gram-positive dominant and anti-inflammatory. Let me quickly show you how that works. In the 19th century, you're eating lots of prebiotic fiber. They're carbohydrates. You can't digest them. They pass into the large bowel intact, and they become fuel for the gram-positive microbes. They're in green, which are saccharolytic. That is, they like to break down carbohydrates, which is why they stay in the center of the gut, in the lumen, where they can find their fuel. They break the fibers down into some very interesting compounds, including short-chain fatty acids, such as butyrate. And this has a very positive effect on us. Its effect on the colonocytes, those cells at the bottom of the picture, which line the colon, anti-inflammatory and chemoprotective. Butyrate kills cancer cells really effectively. So they combine the conversation, if you will, between this healthy microbiota and us is extremely positive. Anti-inflammatory, chemoprotective. Take the fibers away, which is what we've done. The gram-positive bacteria die off. They're replaced by gram-negative bacteria. And the gram-negative bacteria, many of these are proteolytic. That is, they use proteins as a food source, which means they break down mucin break down the mucosal layer, which would otherwise be protecting our colonocytes. They come into direct contact with our colonocytes, as you can see on the bottom right of the picture. And because they're gram-negative, they're coated with lipopolysaccharide, that means. This is a highly, highly pro-inflammatory compound. You get chronic inflammatory stress affecting the walls of the colon. And you get the tight cell junctions between the colonocytes opening up and the translocation of lipopolysaccharides and other macromolecules from the gut, where they should be, into the bloodstream, into the portal circulation, which is one reason, combined with the excessive glycemic load of the modern diet, why 1 in 4 of the world's population now has non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. The cure is very, very simple. Milena, I'll come back to you once we're done. The simple thing is to put prebiotic fibers back into the diet and restore a healthy, anti-inflammatory, chemoprotective microbiome. So what do we use? Small amounts of phos. When a microbe ferments these, it goes along the chain, like eats the beads one by one along the string. Short molecules ferment quickly, so we add larger amounts of inulin, similar molecule but longer, so the fermentation is slower. More of this, oat beta-glucans, and most of this, which is resistant starch from sources such as green bananas. Very complex, ferments very slowly, and you need all of them because once this blend enters the large intestine, the phos reacts first, helping to support the growth of gram-positive bacteria in the ascending colon. Then the inulin takes over. This is not anatomically correct, of course. And then the beta-glucans, and then finally the resistant starch. And in this way, we can transform the microbiota, flipping it from gram-negative, pro-inflammatory, cancer-promoting, to gram-positive, anti-inflammatory, chemoprotective throughout the entire large bowel. These are all the kinds of bacteria we like to see. They all are linked to good health outcomes. They all produce butyrate. And the WHO, in their large-scale data, show that if you have more fiber, you can reduce early death by 30%, a hugely, hugely significant signal. Here we break it down: less cancer, less heart disease, less stroke, and newsflash, this just came out last month, it also reduces the risk of dementia by 25%. That's the gut-brain connection, which I write about in my blog, but we don't have time to go into here. So how much of these fibers should we be eating? WHO says, well, 30 grams. If you eat more, you get better protection. But 9 out of 10 people do not eat enough fiber. They're only eating half the minimum dose that is considered to be protective. Average, we're eating 15 grams of fiber, and out of that, only a quarter are the valuable prebiotic fibers. The WHO data indicate you should be eating at least 7 grams of prebiotic fiber, and we've been very generous. We've doubled that dose. We recommend a dose of 12 grams, which will change your microbiota completely and dramatically change your health risk profile. There's more, though, because as we're getting heavier, what we see is people accumulating deep intra-abdominal adipose tissue, which has a terrible tendency to be infiltrated by macrophages, which then set up little foci of inflammation and release what are known as adipokines, pro-inflammatory messengers, which cause inflammation in other sites. And we'd like to be able to switch that off. Balanced oil will help to do that, but you also need tocopherols, tocotrienols, lipophilic carotenoids, and amphiphilic polyphenols to do the job, which all of which are in Extend and which is designed, amongst other things, to switch off this last source of inflammation. One more, and that, as any dentist will tell you, is periodontal disease. Brush your teeth, spit in the sink, spot of red, you have perio, or periodontal disease. And that's bad news because it is associated with an increased risk of neurodegenerative conditions. Toxins and inflammatory compounds from this dysbiosis in the mouth are moving retrograde through the olfactory nerve into the brain. Very, very strong link to neurodegenerative disease and stroke. And because you're also swallowing these toxins, it increases the risk of a range of cancers. Periodontal disease is serious. We want to try and help you with that. We found a solution under the ocean, not the fish, but the seaweed. Seaweed is slippery. And the reason it's slippery is because that's to prevent fouling. And seaweeds use compounds called fucoidans as a kind of biological Teflon. When you eat these, and many countries do eat seaweeds, the fucoidans are absorbed, they get into the saliva, they coat the roots of the teeth, and when that happens, plaque disappears within 24 hours. And you can test that for yourself using plaque disclosure tablets that you can get from your dentist. After 2 or 3 weeks of this, tartar, which is mineralized plaque, drops off the roots of the teeth, and it's as if you've been to the dental hygienist. We can displace a generation of dental hygienists once we move on to this kind of diet. When the tartar's gone, inflammation stops, gums stop bleeding, and some really interesting Japanese work shows that teeth that were starting to wobble around in the gum sockets are now settling back into the bone. So we can do that xenogene on a maintenance dose that contains these fucoidans. It really takes the problems away. It takes the risk factors away, and I think is a very important additional step. Anyone interested in a long-term health should worth considering. I don't think everybody should swallow every supplement. It's probably best to get a balance test first. If you have really good results, you probably have a pretty good diet and you may not need anything at all. But if you have a bad result, consider a systems approach to inflammation, type B malnutrition, and dysbiosis. Chronic inflammation can be switched off almost everywhere with balance oil, apart from the gut, where you need xenobiotic. That's the time-release blend of prebiotic fibers. Deep fat, periodontal disease, we can stabilize those with Extend. And I'm just going to finish by a quick diagram. I'm sorry about the colors. This came over from another presentation, and the colors are all completely wrong. This is what's killing us, the industrial diet and the low-energy lifestyle, and it's killing us in this way, causing chronic inflammation, dysbiosis, type B malnutrition, and glycemic mismatch, and low-energy lifestyle feeds through to type B malnutrition and glycemic mismatch. They overlap here, and what we are doing is we're countering each one of those major drivers of disease. We can counter chronic inflammation with balance oil, dysbiosis with xenobiotic, type B malnutrition with Extend, and glycemic mismatch. Watch this space. We have a formulation, and it's going to be part of our parcel soon. So we will be able to stable each one of these 4 horses of the nutritional apocalypse. Once you do that, you become your own blue zone. And once you do that, you will gain all of the health benefits that occur from eating a pre-transitional diet. So what I'd like to do now is, if there's time, Carmelo, is to throw it open for questions.
Yes. Well, first of all, Dr. Clayton, thank you so much. That was amazing. I mean, it's incredible what we're doing to our bodies, and we know what to do to get better, and how Zinzino can help. So, se c'è qualcuno che ha qualche domanda da fare, Dr. Clayton è disponibile a rispondere. If there is anyone that would like to ask a question to Dr. Clayton, please do so. So we still have a few minutes to go. So yeah, thank you.
For anyone who would like to look at any of this information in more detail, and I've covered a lot of ground.
Yes.
And if you go to my blog, and I've just put the address in the chat box, that's drpaulclayton.eu. It gives you access to a library of articles, essays, which look at the detailed interaction between diet, lifestyle, and health. And each post is containing between 40 and 100 different references, which the scientists among you can use to enter the wider literature and judge for yourselves the veracity of what I'm saying here.
Yes. Thank you, Paul. Domande, qualcuno? Any questions? I thought I saw somebody raise their hands.
Teresa, you have a question?
Okay, yes, there is a question. Teresa, ok. Adesso puoi togliere il...
Ja mam pytanie, mówię po polsku niestety. Czy może ktoś przetłumaczyć?
Okay.
I don't speak English or...
That's Polish, right? Yeah. Can somebody translate? Mariola, can you translate? Vai.
Sì. Vai,
Okay.
Teresa.
Ja mam pytanie dotyczące ilości DHA i EPA w balance oil. Czy to ma jakieś znaczenie? Czy jest więcej DHA, czy EPA, czy musi być jakiś odpowiedni stosunek, czy to jest wszystko jedno?
Domanda è quanta quantità nel balance oil abbiamo di DHA, I, EPA e se deve esserci una...
What is the quantity of DHA and EPA in balance oil? And should there be a right balance for these two kinds of fatty acids, or should we increase one or the other of either DHA and EPA?
Okay. So she wants to know how much EPA there is in balance oil.
Yes, sir. Yes, she wants to know the balance between DHA and EPA in balance oil.
A w innych EPA, czy to ma jakieś znaczenie?
Ok, no, ho capito. Ok.
Vuole sapere quanti milligrammi ci sono di uno dell'altro e come
She wants to know exactly how many milligrams we have of DHA and EPA in balance oil, considering that you have mentioned, or she has seen other omega-3 oils which are not the same as the one by Zizero.
Can someone translate that into English for me?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me? I am translating into English for you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, noi ti sentiamo, solo adesso ti sentiamo solamente a te. Dovessi rientrare dove eri prima. Yeah. Paul, can you speak now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah.
Dr. Clayton, can you hear me? I understand, but can you hear me?
Which I didn't really understand. I had it
Okay.
in Italian, which I understand a little, but I need to hear it.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Can you hear the English channel now? Dr. Clayton, can you hear me on the English channel now?
Carmelo, perdonami. Solo tu.
Sì. Traduco io allora.
Antonio, can you translate that into English?
Yes, allora facciamo di nuovo, dimmi di nuovo Mariola passo per passo così glielo dico io al dottor Clayton.
Allora, Teresa chiede quanto DHA e EPA abbiamo nel nostro balance
oil. How
oil.
much do we have DHA and EPA in our balance oil?
Visto che ha visto altri omega 3 e non le quadrano i numeri. Sì.
Because she saw other omega 3s that had different numbers.
Okay, the numbers, yeah, I understand. So here,
vorrebbe solo sapere, cioè nel nostro balance oil, cioè a che serve queste quantità che ci sono. Ecco.
Okay. Okay, so she wants to know the quantities that we have in our balance oil, what are they good for?
Okay, the quantities, the fish oil that we use is a standard 30% grade fish oil. This is very common. A lot of other companies sell the same level of fish oil. What makes our fish oil different is that we use the chaperones that we use. We do not use vitamin E, which is really not correct at all. It's not effective. We use amphiphilic polyphenols derived from olive oil. And that is what makes the difference. That is what creates optimal secondary bioavailability.
Thank you. Okay. Altre domande?
Could I suggest that if Teresa would like to see more of this, if she goes to my blog,
okay,
and types in the search term fish oil, snake oil.
Mariola, se tu dici a Teresa di andare nel blog di Paul Clayton, che lui l'ha messo nel chat, no? Il suo blog, lì puoi vedere tutte le informazioni.
And there she will find a lot of information, detailed information.
Con moltissimi dettagli. Ok. Thank you, Paul. Altre domande? Qualcuno?
Dr. Clayton, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Penso di no.
Il traduttore non può arrivare al canale.
Sì, non ti sente. Perché c'è qualcosa che devi dire, Paul? Vabbè, dai. Paul, I think that's it. I really appreciate...
We have Dr. Giovanni Scalet.
Ah, yes, Giovanni. Vai, Giovanni, caro. Giovanni, ci sei?
Sì, ci sono, mi sentite?
Ecco.
Ciao Giovanni.
Buonasera. Se poteva il dottor Clayton spiegare l'incidenza del movimento sull'acidosi cellulare, in positivo o in negativo, in termini di attività fisica, di allenamento?
Incidenza cellulare?
L'incidenza del movimento?
The incidence of the movement, yeah?
Sì, in merito all'acidosi cellulare.
Quello non so come tradurlo, ti dico. Yeah. Perché non glielo scrivi nel chat?
Napiši nam to u chatu.
Magari dottor Emanuele De Nobili, sai come si dice in inglese? Ecco, fatto.
Sì, esatto.
Emanuele, ti sto dando il microfono.
Acidosis cellular.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry
about that.
What exactly is the relevance of your question? Are you asking whether that we can help with cellular acidosis or whether our products might cause it? I'm not sure. What is the question?
Might cause it, yeah.
No,
la correla al movimento fisico, al fitness, nel bene e nel male.
You're talking about fitness.
Yes. Yeah. The positive and the negatives.
Okay. Well, we have done some, we have one publication, which is really a review, and we have some informal work as well. What we are seeing is that when we treat athletics personnel or, for example, football players or cyclists or skiers, they have less injury, less inflammation, less downtime. They are able to compete more consistently, and during the training season, they are able to complete more training periods. Their overall effect on their performance has been, again, consistently positive.
Many thanks.
Giovanni, why do you ask that? I'm interested. Do you have a particular interest in sports and athletics?
Come mai ha chiesto Giovanni? Cioè hai degli interessi?
L'ho posto questa domanda perché ho fatto il balance test ad atleti e li ho trovati.
Li hai trovato che? Non ti sento.
And they have 60, 68, 52 bars.
Yes, I've seen this as well. That's very interesting. And I think that the reason is they get very bad advice from their nutritionists, particularly if the nutritionists, for example, are using carbohydrate loading. That has a very unfortunate effect. In the long term, that will be very negative for their health consequences.
Yeah.
I understand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Giovanni. Anyone else? Altre domande da qualcuno? Erio, sì.
I have one personal message from Jasmina.
Mariola segnalava.
Mariola.
Sì. Sì, vorrei chiedere per chi soffre di gotta, quindi accumulo di acidi urici se il nostro balance oil è in grado di dare una mano. E chi lo traduce?
For those who suffer of acido, come hai detto, perché non ti ho sentito.
Urico.
Yeah, uric acid, if the balance oil helps.
Not very much. No,
No.
if you have excessive levels of uric acid and you're talking about gout, then in that case, the main focus should be on dietary alteration and the reduced intake of purines. And this is has been known for many, many years by the medical profession. I also have a question directly from Yasmina, who wants to know, is it significant or important for children to use the health protocol? I'll say it isn't. Most children do not need the health protocol. If they have a particular problem, a health problem, for example, they have allergy or an inflammatory skin disorder, then it may be useful to use balance oil in combination with Protect. That particular combination is certainly helpful. For other children, for example, who have autism, ADD, ADHD, we find that the combination of balance oil and xenobiotic is very helpful. We know that there is very frequently a dysbiosis in these children, which is intimately connected to the behavioral manifestations. The combination, as I said, balance oil and xenobiotic, has been used now to help many children, even badly affected children, to achieve a state of normality or near normality.
Thank you. Altre domande? Any more questions?
Wow. I hope there would be more questions and more criticisms. As a scientist, I welcome criticism.
Yeah, see that's Paul. I mean, the information that you gave was just amazing. I mean, I can't believe what we've done, to our bodies over the last century, and the data that you showed, it's really surprising. It's just incredible. I mean, it shouldn't be surprising the way we are going. I mean, at this rate, I don't know where the humans are going. So, but there is an answer, and we know what to do, and we have to do it. And Zinzino is there, to help the world improve their lives and their health.
Well, so, we have the antidotes to modern life.
Yes.
One question from Brane Bozic, who says, when should you take Viva? For those who, some people find that if they have problems sleeping, for example, they have anxiety and depression and have problems sleeping, for them it's best to take the Viva, let's say half an hour or an hour before you retire to bed. For some people, the improvement in energy levels is so great that Viva can make sleep difficult. For them, it's better to take the Viva on waking, that is first thing in the morning.
Yeah. Thank you. Eli has a question. Eli, c'hai una domanda da fare? C'è anche Giusy. Uno, ok. Vai Giusy. Eli, sei te?
Sorry, I have a question?
Yeah, sure.
In regards of the autoimmune diseases, right? So let's say the Protect and all the beta glucans kind of promote the activity of the immune system. Can too much of beta glucans or any kind of other kind of improving immune system would kind of counterbalance that, or I mean would be kind of a negative effect on the but actually I believe that like anyway the balance oil, it's improving the system and working. So couple of thoughts about that. Thanks.
Well, when you have an autoimmune disease, the immune system destroys its target through a process of chronic inflammation. So if we can bring the 63 ratio down low enough to 2.5 or 2, at that point, the autoimmune disease cannot progress because the chronic inflammation is stopped. Now, the question you ask about the beta-glucans is a common one, but it's not a problem because the main effect of the beta-glucans is on the innate immune cells. So macrophages, neutrophils, NK cells, CD8 cells, things like that. The cells that are involved in autoimmune disease are a different population of immune cells, and we're not really changing them very much. So we know that, for example, when we give beta-glucans to animals which have had heterografts, that is, they're now developing an autoimmune response, not a classical one, but it is, you can think of it as autoimmune. Taking the beta-glucans does not cause any problems at all. And we also know many Xeno users who have rheumatoid arthritis, type 1 diabetes, SLE, Graves, I mean, tens of thousands, and they have no problems with the beta-glucans at all. We do not expect that to be.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Giusy? Sì, vai.
Posso parlare?
Sì, ti ascoltiamo.
Allora, volevo sapere, nel caso in cui ci siano delle problematiche di fibromialgia delle donne.
In case there is a problem of fibromyalgia in the woman.
Okay. Well, we find that balanced oil has a slight effect, only a slight effect. But if we combine it with high doses of vitamin D, there seems to be synergy. So I would recommend in such cases quite a large dose, 10,000 international units of vitamin D a day. I know that some doctors will think this is excessive, but the reality is where I live, I make 20,000 units of vitamin D in my skin every day. I think that the upper safety limits for vitamin D have been revised upwards considerably in the last few years and will be revised upwards again. So balance oil plus 10,000 international units of D a day, and I think that you will notice a difference.
Grazie.
There is another question on the chat, Paul. Can I, helicopter,
Steve.
Helicobacter pylori. Okay.
Steve Carmelo.
Mm-hmm. Okay, our health protocol does not affect Helicobacter pylori.
Okay.
It does not.
Steve, you have a question? Steve?
Monica is asking whether you can use the healthcare protocol after chemotherapy. And the answer is yes. If the chemotherapy has been completed, you can use every part of the health protocol. I would recommend also that if you are receiving chemotherapy, you should always combine this with the 1316 beta-glucans and Protect and with Xenobiotic. We know that chemotherapy damages the immune system, suppresses the bone marrow, and damages the gastrointestinal system. If you take Protect and Xenobiotic, that will reduce the damage that chemotherapy would otherwise do.
Okay.
Sophia asks, from which age can we give Viva supplements to children? Well, my first question is, why do you want to give the Viva supplement to the child? I would only recommend that it be used if the child has diagnosed depressive illness or anxiety. In such cases, the Viva may be very helpful indeed. The recommended dose is 2 tablets, which gives a total of 36 milligrams of the saffron extract. It's very low, very safe. And I do not have much experience using Viva in children, but in the few cases that I've seen, it has been really life-transforming. Maya asks,
posso? Mi sentite?
Sì, okay. Sì, Ellie.
Ok. Buonasera, dottor Clayton. Allora, la mia domanda è questa. Spesso mi è capitato di avere qualche cliente che durante l'assunzione del balance oil ha avuto dei problemi di gestione. Cioè,
Okay, well, aspetta.
ok.
Dr. Clayton, she said that one of her clients sometimes have had issues of digestion after taking the balance oil.
Yeah.
Allora, io ho consigliato magari di insistere perché penso che all'inizio il nostro organismo debba abituarsi a questi nuovi nutrienti, no? Però le volevo chiedere, c'è eventualmente diciamo, un momento migliore per poterlo assumere e quindi superare questo fastidio?
What she's saying is what's the best time to take this product so that people will not get this problem?
Mm-hmm. If the client is developing gastrointestinal problems, then it may be that there is malabsorption. So, for example, in such a client, I would immediately investigate the possibility of gallbladder or bile duct disease. And this is quite common. Particularly in women over the age of 40, particularly in people who are heavier. And if that is the problem, then it can be resolved by switching to AquaX. That's designed to help exactly with this problem.
Paul, two quick questions from the chat. Does the Viva also affects the memory?
Ok, grazie.
In the people with arthritis.
Can I speak now?
Well, let me answer the question that's in the chat box. Yes. Can Viva have an impact on memory? Well, if you're suffering from an anxiety condition, one of the things that anxiety does, it does impair and disrupt memory formation. And so by by reducing stress, by acting as an anxiolytic, by alleviating low mood states and depression, Viva is very helpful in some people in improving memory. If the memory loss reflects a neurodegenerative condition, if we're talking about age-related cognitive decline, Viva will not be very helpful there.
Okay.
No.
So, right, a question from Luca Martulo.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Steve? Steve, I can hear you. Steve Zanardi?
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
C'è Steve Zanardi da un bel po' di tempo in attesa.
Steve, go ahead, Steve. Bye.
Okay. Hi, Dr. Clayton. Thanks so much for your presentation. Before you spoke about a new product, when will be available?
Well, the truth is that I had a formulation which we could have released 2 years ago. The problem is that the regulators in different countries have different views. Every country said fine except one. And because we are a multinational company, we have to meet the approval of the regulators in all of our markets. Therefore, this product was not released. I have now found an alternative, and we are moving towards production before the end of the year. I have a question in the chat box from Luca Martulo.
Yes.
A client uses Xenobiotic and had a bloating problem. When Xenobiotic, the program was reduced, but after 5 months it began to swell again. Okay, I'm not sure what's happening here, but it could be that there is a problem here called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIBO. And if you have this condition and you then start to consume prebiotic fibers such as FOS and inulin, then you have a problem. What you have to do in such cases is to flush the bacteria, which are good bacteria, they're in the wrong place, out of the small intestine and back into the large intestine where they should be. And there is some evidence that you can do this using a very old-fashioned remedy, which was used in Germany for hundreds of years, which has the ability to move the bacteria on. Now, some people will be familiar with the use of L-mannose to treat urinary tract infections. It's the same idea. It's an anti-adhesive. You're dislodging the bacteria so they're flushed away. If you make carrot soup in the traditional way, it produces oligosaccharides, which act just like L-mannose does in the urinary tract. So what you do is you have to boil the carrots until the soup starts to become slightly sweet. That sweetness tells you that the carrot starches are being broken down into these smaller sugars. And then 2 bowls of carrot soup, which you can flavor with orange peel or or chili, anything you like. 2 bowls a day for, let's say, a week. And in many cases, that seems to be enough to remove these bacteria. And then, once again, xenobiotic can be used. Hashimoto thyreoiditis, okay, from Maya. Hi, Maya. Hashimoto's is an autoimmune disease. It's the opposite to Graves. Here you have the immune system attacking the thyroid in a way that reduces the amount of thyroid hormone that is being released into the blood. The damage, again, is being exerted through a form of chronic inflammation. You can switch that off by using balance oil to bring the 6-to-3 ratio down to 2.5, 2. You may even need to go a little bit lower than that. But once you get low enough, the inflammation will stop and thyroid function will start to move back towards normal.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. I know that we are well over the time limit, but let's take one more questions about the E. coli. Somebody was asking about that.
Okay. Amila, I have to ask you, are you talking about E. coli in the gut or in any other tissue? Let me tell you, if it's in the gut, then xenobiotic will help because it will help the good bacteria to grow, and then the good bacteria will start to fight against the bad ones. So that's one simple thing you can do. If the E. coli infection is in another tissue, then I recommend a natural antibiotic, which is very effective, and it's called KIB 500. I've just typed it in the chat box, and you can find that on the internet. It's an antibiotic, a true antibiotic, which is derived from cow's milk and which is extremely effective.
Okay. I know that we have so many other questions. We will be here all day, but if you, I mean, I don't want to take any more of your time, Paul. You know, anybody that has any other questions, you know, send them to me. I put my email below, and then I can forward it to Dr. Clayton. And I really appreciate everything that your presence from all over the world. I know that we have people from Spain, from Croatia, from Poland, Serbia, and I really appreciate your interest in being here today. Paul, I have no words to thank you for your incredible presentation, your knowledge. You are a star, and we're so proud to have you on board here with us, and really working with you. It's a treat, and I really appreciate it. E vorrei ringraziare tutti voi veramente per la vostra partecipazione, siete veramente delle persone speciali. Grazie a tutti quelli che anche quelli nuovi che si sono affacciati dalla finestra a vedere Zinzino. Spero che siete rimasti contenti e faremo questo di nuovo un'altra volta, ok? Buona serata a tutti, ci sentiamo presto. Paul, thank you so much. Have a fantastic weekend.
Thank you,
sir.
Thank you to everyone. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.